I saw my father's signature on the contract, and right below it, the buyer's name was mine. And no one in that room had a clue. The conference table was polished so well it reflected every smirk aimed at me. My brothers lounged in leather chairs, trading glances like they'd already divided the spoils. My father stood at the head, one hand on the papers, the other wrapped around a glass of bourbon. The amber light caught the veins on his wrist, the one I'd watched slam down countless verdicts in this family. "This," he said, tapping the stack, "is the deal that will secure our future. Our future." His voice made it sound like the word excluded me. I leaned back, let the leather groan under me. No one asked for my opinion, same as always. But I didn't need to speak, not yet. The legal rep slid the contract toward him. My father signed with a flourish, the way he'd sign a check for a round of golf or a new car for my brothers. Everyone applauded. I kept my hands still on my lap. Then I caught my reflection in the glass wall, jaw tight, eyes calm, and for the first time in years, I didn't look like the kid they could sideline. "Who's the buyer?" my eldest brother asked, pretending not to know. "Some figure in the industry," my father said, "knows how to scale, apparently." His smirk cut toward me. "Maybe you'll learn a thing or two." The laughter rolled around the room, like coins spilling from a broken jar. I let it pass over me. My pen tapped against my knee in a rhythm only I recognized. One more hour. Then I'd own them all. The boardroom door opened. The notary entered, her eyes flicking to me before she spoke. "All parties need to sign in the buyer's presence," she said. My father gestured impatiently toward the hallway. "Well, bring him in." I stood, the chair legs scraped against the marble. "No need," I said, sliding the second folder from my briefcase. The gold lettering caught the light. My own company's name, hidden in plain sight for years. Every head turned. My father's brow knotted. "What the hell is this?" "Your buyer," I said, placing the folder in front of him. "And this is just the beginning." I could feel the weight of the moment pressing in from all sides. The shocked silence, the shifting of suits, the realization crawling up their spines. I started thinking, when did it all begin? It wasn't one moment. It was a slow drip. The kind that hollows out stone before you notice the hole. I remember being 17, bussing tables in one of our first restaurants while my brothers held meetings in the back office. My father would pass me on his way in, barely glancing up from his phone. "Don't scratch the wood," he'd say, like I was just another hire he could replace by the end of the day. Back then, I told myself it was fine. Someone had to clear the plates. Someone had to learn the business from the ground up. I thought that was the point, that one day they'd respect me for it. They didn't. Years later, I was still helping out, except now I was managing schedules, fixing suppliers' mistakes, and training staff. My ideas for menu changes, marketing campaigns, expansion locations. They'd float into the room, get ignored, then come back to me with my brother's name on them. I should have confronted them, but instead I studied, quietly. One night, while I was closing up, I saw my brothers in the bar, laughing with my father. "He's good with people," my eldest said. "Let him keep the floor staff in line. We'll handle the real decisions." The way my father nodded, it wasn't even cruel. Just final. Like a verdict no one could appeal. I learned to stop reacting. When they laughed, I laughed quieter. When they shut the office door, I didn't knock. I listened. And one night, I heard something worth keeping. My middle brother was on the phone, pacing, muttering about a potential competitor buying up restaurant properties in other cities. "They're moving fast," he said. "Private name, small shell companies. No one knows who's behind it." That was the first time I realized those shell companies could be mine. I didn't act right away. I just began filing away every small humiliation, every ignored suggestion, every meeting I wasn't invited to. I went home and wrote it all down. Patterns formed, opportunities appeared. Still, I had moments of hesitation. There was a time, maybe 2 years ago, when I almost told my father about my other business. We were in the kitchen after hours, him nursing a glass of scotch, me checking the day's numbers. "You're not like your brothers," he said suddenly. I looked up. "You actually work," he added, almost like a compliment. Then he laughed. "Too bad it doesn't make you a leader." I didn't tell him that night. I walked out, got into my car, and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. My fingers hurt from gripping it. After that, I stopped wavering. I started spending less time on the family payroll and more on my own acquisitions. Coffee shops, small bistros, catering services, anything that bled into the same market without raising a flag. I kept my name buried under layers of LLCs. I hired people they'd never meet, paid them better than my father ever paid me. And I watched. At family dinners, my brothers talked about expansion plans they couldn't afford, suppliers they couldn't control, staff turnover they couldn't fix. I'd smile, sip my wine, and offer nothing. But there was one dinner I'll never forget 6 months ago. My father announced they were looking for a buyer. Not because the business was failing, he would never admit that, but because it's time to cash out while we're still ahead. My eldest brother asked if it would be a public sale. My father shook his head. We're dealing directly with a group that knows the industry. It'll be clean. I knew in that moment he had no idea the group was mine. That night, I drove past one of our first locations. The neon sign was flickering, the parking lot empty. I remembered being a kid, wiping down tables while my father shouted orders in the kitchen. I remembered thinking, one day this will all be mine. Now I knew it would be, just not the way he imagined. Still, in the weeks that followed, there were moments I almost doubted myself. Watching my father pore over papers late at night, seeing the lines on his face deepen, it made me wonder if I was about to burn something too big to rebuild. But then I'd overhear him talking about me like I was already gone. He'll land on his feet, he told a friend once. Somewhere small, somewhere he belongs. That's when the last of the doubt went. I didn't need his permission. I didn't need his blessing. All I needed was the right moment to step into the light. And it was coming faster than they realized. The first step was small, too small for them to notice. I stopped correcting their mistakes. If an order was placed with the wrong supplier, I let it stand. If an invoice was double charged, I let it get paid. When my brothers complained about rising costs, I nodded sympathetically and wrote down the numbers in my own ledger. Every bad decision became a breadcrumb leading exactly where I wanted them. I started visiting restaurants they didn't know I owned, under my other name, just to watch the contrast. In one place, the staff moved like clockwork, happy and efficient. In another, one of my father's locations, the manager was yelling at a dishwasher in front of customers. The air felt heavy, like everyone knew the walls were closing in, but no one dared say it out loud. That night, I called a lawyer I'd met years ago when I helped a friend with a contract dispute. I need a buyer's agreement, I told her, and I need it airtight. She laughed. Who are you buying from? My own family, I said. The silence on the other end was almost satisfying. The document she sent me was more than airtight. It was a steel trap. It allowed the buyer me to review every line of the company's financials before closing, and it required them to disclose any irregularities. If they failed to, the penalties would be severe. I knew they'd skim over it. My father hated reading fine print. My brothers couldn't sit still long enough to finish a paragraph. Meanwhile, I began planting rumors. Not outright lies, just possibilities. I let it slip to a supplier that our chain might be changing hands soon. Within days, staff started whispering about layoffs. My brothers scrambled to reassure them, but every reassurance meant more promises they couldn't keep. One afternoon, I accidentally ran into my eldest brother at the bank. Big deposit? I asked, glancing at the envelope in his hand. Just moving some funds, he said too quickly. For expansion. I smiled. Hope it works out this time. The truth was, I already knew it wouldn't. I'd seen the numbers, they were draining cash to cover losses. Expansion was the last thing they could afford. A week later, I met with the lawyer again, this time in a cafe my brothers had never set foot in. I laid out everything I'd collected, receipts, statements, emails. You're building a case, she said. I'm building a future, I corrected her. The difference was important. I wasn't just here for revenge. I wanted the company but on my terms, clean and ready to grow, without their fingerprints on every bad decision. Still, I couldn't resist a small test. At the next family dinner, my father was talking about the buyer, still oblivious. They're smart, he said, but not too smart to push me around. I leaned forward. What if they are? The table went quiet for a second, then my brothers burst out laughing. My father smirked. Then they'll learn I don't lose. I let that hang in the air while I buttered a piece of bread. Not long now, I thought. 2 days later, I visited one of our newer locations, the one my middle brother was supposed to manage. The floors were sticky, half the tables empty. the staff miserable. I asked for the manager, and when he came out, I recognized the desperation in his eyes. "They're cutting hours," he whispered, "but telling corporate it's voluntary." That was the piece I needed. Cutting hours but reporting otherwise meant wage theft, and wage theft meant leverage. I met with the lawyer again that night. We added a clause to the agreement that would make them personally liable for any undisclosed labor violations. They'd sign it without blinking. By then, the plan was locked. The buyer was a fully registered entity under my control. The financing was ready. The legal traps were in place. All that remained was to let them walk right into it. But something had shifted in me. I wasn't just quietly building anymore. I was maneuvering. When I spoke, even casually, I felt the weight of my own authority behind it. At another dinner, my eldest brother complained about a staffing shortage. "People don't want to work anymore," he said. "Or maybe," I replied, "they just don't want to work for you." He froze for half a second before forcing a laugh. My father frowned but didn't comment. That was the moment I realized they were starting to feel it. They didn't know what it was yet, but they could sense the ground shifting. I left that night knowing I'd already won. The rest was just paperwork. The first blow came from where I least expected it. I had the agreement ready, the financing lined up, the trap set. All that was left was for them to sign. I walked into the boardroom confident, almost smug, expecting a straightforward handover. But my father was already there, flanked by both brothers and a man I didn't recognize, sharp suit, too new watch, eyes that never stayed still. "This is Victor," my father said. "He's a friend. He's going to handle negotiations on our side." Victor smiled the way a wolf might smile at a lamb that thinks it's safe. "I've taken the liberty of reviewing your proposal," he said. "Interesting terms, but we'll be making a few changes." He slid a folder toward me. I flipped it open. My clauses gone. The penalties for non-disclosure deleted. And in their place, an absurd non-compete clause that would lock me out of the industry for 5 years if the deal fell through. My father leaned back, hands behind his head. Nothing personal, just business. I felt the weight shift. The air in the room was heavier, my pulse sharper in my ears. They'd found a way to turn my weapon against me. I could have walked. I should have. But walking would mean giving them the satisfaction of seeing me retreat. So I signed the revised preliminary agreement, knowing it might bury me. For the next week, I was in freefall. My lawyer was furious. "You've given them leverage to choke you out entirely. If they stall or pull out, you're done." I didn't argue. I just sat there, staring at the neat blue ink of my own signature like it was a bruise I'd given myself. At home, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Victor's smirk, my father's relaxed confidence, my brother's thinly veiled amusement. I'd imagined walking into the closing with control. Instead, I was locked in their game. One night, I poured myself a drink and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The glass was cracked from where I'd dropped it months ago, and my reflection fractured into sharp pieces. I looked like a man being cut apart by his own ambition. The next day, my middle brother called. "You always thought you were smarter than us," he said. "Turns out you're not even playing the same sport." I didn't answer. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles whitened. There was one last hope. The closing date was still weeks away. If I could find something they hadn't disclosed yet, something big enough, I could still turn it. But the clock was ticking, and every lead I chased went cold. Then came the humiliation. At a family dinner, one I almost skipped, my father raised his glass. "To my sons," he said, "and to keeping the business in hands that understand it." He didn't look at me when he spoke. My brothers clinked glasses, grinning. The staff watched. They weren't part of the family, but they saw the dynamic, the pecking order. And that night, for the first time in years, I felt like the kid bussing tables again, silent, invisible, unnecessary. I left early, the sound of their laughter still echoing in my ears as I walked to the car. The cold air bit at my skin. My breath came fast, not from the walk, but from the pounding in my chest. For the first time since I'd started this plan, I felt something close to panic. If I failed now, it wouldn't just be a missed opportunity. It would be a public defeat, a story they'd tell for years about the time I tried to outsmart them and lost. In the dark of my apartment, I sat at my desk, surrounded by piles of paper, empty glasses, and the growing certainty that I'd pushed too far, too fast. I'd built this for years. But maybe they'd been building something too. And maybe, just maybe, I was already standing in the middle of their trap. I didn't sleep that night. At 4 in the morning, I was still at my desk, staring at the revised agreement Victor had handed me. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of a verdict. I kept asking myself the same question: why bring him in now? My father had always relied on his own ego. Suddenly, outsourcing the negotiation didn't fit. That's when I noticed something. Victor's address on the correspondence wasn't a law office. It was a holding company. I typed the name into the state business registry. The list of assets scrolled on my screen: restaurants, warehouses, real estate, and a handful of corporate shells that looked very familiar. I clicked one. The owner was listed as a trust. And the trust? Managed by a bank my father had used for decades. It hit me. Victor wasn't an outsider. He was a proxy. And if his holding company had been quietly buying hospitality properties, they weren't protecting themselves from me. They were preparing to flip our business into something bigger, maybe even multinational. This wasn't just about cutting me out. This was about taking the company into a world I'd never even been allowed to see. I needed someone who knew that world. At 7, I called Jenna, a former operations director from a competing chain I'd once acquired under my other name. She'd left after uncovering a massive fraud scheme. "I need eyes on a holding company," I told her. "You're in trouble," she said. "I'm in a war," I corrected. We met that afternoon at a quiet coffee shop. I slid her the file. She skimmed through it, pausing at the trust structures. "This isn't just about your family," she said. "These entities are linked to a hospitality conglomerate in Singapore. They buy failing chains, gut them, and flip the assets offshore. If your father sells to them, it's not a sale, it's an extraction. And the second the deal closes, they'll strip the brand, fire half the staff, and sell the real estate." That landed like a punch. This wasn't only my revenge anymore. This was every employee, every location, every piece of the thing I'd spent years quietly building a future for. "Can you prove it?" I asked. She smirked, already on it. By evening, she'd found the missing link, an internal memo from one of Victor's subsidiaries outlining post-acquisition restructuring plans for our chain. It was damning: names, dates, projections for liquidation. I stared at the printout, the coffee in my hand going cold. I'd come into this wanting to take the business for myself. Now I realized I was the only one who could keep it from being gutted. It shifted something in me. Revenge had been enough to keep me going before, but now the target wasn't just my family, it was the machine they'd hitched themselves to. I called my lawyer. "We're rewriting the agreement, again." "They'll never sign," she said. "They won't know," I replied, "until it's too late." The new plan wasn't about forcing them into penalties anymore, it was about building a legal minefield that would explode if they tried to sell to anyone else. Jenna helped me thread in references to brand continuity and employment guarantees, clauses that would make it impossible for the conglomerate to follow through without paying more than the company was worth. The trick was getting them to sign without realizing what they were agreeing to. I felt the fear from last week melting into something else: clarity. This was bigger than my grudge, bigger than my bruised pride. If I pulled this off, I wouldn't just own the business, I'd save it from being dismantled. And in the process, I'd force my family to see me as something they'd never dared to imagine: indispensable. For the first time in days, I slept. Not long, but deep. When I woke, the panic was gone. The war was still on, but I finally knew which battlefield mattered. The first move was public. My father loved appearances, grand dinners, charity events, networking galas. So I made sure to be at the annual hospitality fundraiser 2 weeks before the closing. Not just present, but seen. I walked in with Jenna. She was in a black dress, hair pinned back, looking every bit the industry insider she was. We didn't need to tell anyone we were working together. Our presence side by side was enough to make people ask questions. The room was a swirl of chatter, crystal glasses, and the hum of money moving through conversations. I spotted my father and brothers by the stage, Victor nearby, scanning the room like a hawk. I didn't go to them first. Instead, I worked the floor, shaking hands with suppliers, chatting with regional managers, laughing with competitors. Every smile, every nod was a signal. I'm not the kid bussing tables anymore. When I finally approached my family, my father's eyes flicked to Jenna. "Friend of yours?" "Advisor," I said simply. Victor's gaze narrowed. "Interesting choice." I smiled. "I thought so." We didn't linger. Jenna and I moved on, deliberately leaving them in our wake. It was a small shift, but I could feel the balance changing. Other people were starting to treat me as an equal, not an afterthought. The next day, we started the real work. Jenna and I met in a quiet office space I'd rented under one of my shell companies. We spread the revised agreement out on the table. "They'll skim it," she said, red pen in hand. "They're too busy thinking they've already won." She marked the employment guarantee clauses in a way that made them look like boilerplate. She buried the brand continuity requirements deep inside sections about marketing rights. It was beautiful legal camouflage. At the same time, we began building a parallel trail. Through one of my other companies, I started exploring bids for unrelated properties. The idea was to make it look like I was moving on, losing interest. If my father thought I had another project in play, he'd push to close faster. The push worked. A week later, I got a call from my eldest brother. "Dad wants to move the signing up, end of next week." I kept my voice flat. "Fine, tell him I'll be there." But I didn't just wait. 2 nights before the new date, Jenna and I sat in my car outside one of Victor's offices. Through a window, we could see lights still on. We watched as 2 men carried boxes of files to a van. "Think those are clean?" Jenna asked. "No," I said, "and if they're moving them now, it means something's about to change." The next morning, one of my contacts inside the company sent me a short message. "Victor's pushing for full control before signing. Wants you out completely." It confirmed what I'd suspected. They weren't just selling, they were preparing to cut me out before the ink dried. That night, Jenna and I went over every scenario. "If they spot these clauses before signing," she began. "They won't," I interrupted. "They think I'm cornered. They think this is my last chance. That's why it'll work." The night before the meeting, I attended a staff appreciation dinner at one of our flagship locations. My brothers barely acknowledged me, but the employees. They came up to me, one after another, telling me how they'd heard I was trying to keep the business in local hands. I didn't confirm it, but I didn't deny it either. I could feel the crowd as a force eyes watching, whispers passing. If tomorrow went the way I planned, those whispers would turn into a story. On the drive home, I caught my reflection in the window. I didn't look like the man who'd walked into the first boardroom weeks ago. My posture was different, my expression was steady. Tomorrow wasn't just the closing, it was the unveiling. The closing was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp in the same glass-walled boardroom where this all began. I arrived early. Not too early, just enough to look deliberate. I wore the same navy suit I'd worn years ago at a family meeting where my father had laughed at one of my proposals. Back then it had felt like armor too big for me. Today it fit. One by one, they arrived, my eldest brother first, phone glued to his ear. My middle brother looking like he'd barely slept. My father with Victor at his side, radiating satisfaction. "Let's make this quick," my father said, dropping into his chair. The notary began laying out the paperwork. The contract sat in the center of the table, thick and crisp, each page waiting for signatures. I didn't touch my pen. Victor leaned forward. "Buyer ready to proceed?" "I am," I said. "But first, something we need to address." From my briefcase, I pulled a folder, not the contract, but the memo Jenna had found, the one detailing the post-acquisition liquidation. I slid it into the center of the table. "This," I said, "is your buyer's real plan." My brothers glanced at each other, confusion breaking their rehearsed indifference. My father didn't even look down at the papers at first, until he caught the Singapore letterhead. Then his eyes narrowed. Victor kept his expression neutral, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "That's confidential." "Not anymore," I said. I let the silence spread. Outside the glass wall, people were moving through the lobby, catching glimpses inside. The boardroom wasn't just a room today, it was a stage. "You sell to them," I continued, "and in 6 months, there won't be a single restaurant left. Staff fired, properties flipped overseas. The name Dad built gone." My father's fingers drummed against the table. "You're bluffing." I opened the contract to the pages Jenna and I had altered. "I'm not. These clauses ensure brand continuity and protect every current employee. Any attempt to violate them will cost the buyer more than the business is worth." My middle brother frowned. You put that in the agreement?" "Months ago," I said. "And you've all already initialed those pages." That got their attention. I saw my eldest brother reach for the contract like it was a live wire. Victor's eyes flicked to it, scanning, calculating. "This is unacceptable," Victor said. "No," I said, leaning forward. "What's unacceptable is pretending this is just business while you gut it for parts." The notary cleared her throat. "Are we proceeding?" I could see the calculation running through my father's mind: walk away and lose the buyer, or sign and be forced to keep the business intact under my terms. Either way, I was in control now. He looked at me. Really looked. Not the way he used to, past me, through me, but at me. Then he signed. My brothers followed, reluctant but trapped. Victor signed last, his pen pressing hard enough to nearly tear the paper. As the notary gathered the documents, I stood. "Thank you," I said, loud enough for the people outside to hear. "I'll take it from here." There was a ripple in the lobby, heads turning, whispers starting. Victor didn't shake my hand. My brothers didn't speak. My father just sat there, hands flat on the table, staring like he was trying to solve a puzzle that no longer made sense. I walked out first. I didn't need applause, and I didn't need to see their faces any longer. The point had been made. By the time I stepped into the elevator, the noise from the boardroom was already fading. The war was over, and I was the one still standing. A week later, I stood in the doorway of our very first restaurant. The neon sign had been fixed, burning steady against the evening sky. Inside, the staff moved with an energy I hadn't seen in years. Tables full, kitchen humming, laughter spilling into the street. I didn't announce myself. I just walked to the corner booth, the one I'd cleared 100 times as a teenager. From here, I could see everything: the polished floors, the framed photos on the wall, the quiet pride in the way the new manager greeted customers by name. Through the front window, headlights swept past. For a second, I saw my father's reflection in the glass, standing outside, watching. Our eyes met. I didn't wave. He didn't come in. I turned back to my coffee, letting the warmth settle into my hands. The hum of the room swallowed the sound of the street. Everything was still. Everything was mine. Everything.